1. A breathing space, but not peace. After more than 2 years of relentless conflict, a U.S.-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is now in effect. Under the terms, Hamas will exchange bodies and captives, Israel will pull back troops from certain zones, and aid deliveries will resume across key crossings. For many in Gaza, these are not small gains, they're lifelines. Being able to fetch water, scavenge for food, or visit collapsed buildings without constant bombardment brings a measure of dignity. But the relief is fragile. The fear of renewed war shadows every step. Maintaining this pause isn't a question of goodwill. It's a structural challenge. Gaza's infrastructure is mostly wrecked, borders are tightly sealed, and the rubble hides bodies and landmines. Without serious reconstruction, trust, and enforcement, the truce risks becoming just another breathing space between disasters. 2. Trump's ultimatum, backing forceful action. Donald Trump entered this moment with a stark message. If Hamas violates the ceasefire, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them. He later qualified that U.S. troops would likely not take the lead, but that others, Israeli or regional proxies, close by, would act with U.S. support. AP News. This is more than forceful rhetoric, it's political positioning. By placing heavy responsibility on Hamas for enforcement, the U.S. is signaling that the burden of peace will rest on the weaker side. It also gives Israel room to act, under the umbrella of U.S. legitimacy, if things go off script. But rhetoric is cheap. The real question is whether the U.S. will commit the diplomatic, financial, and possibly military muscle needed to back up the threat, especially when public support for foreign intervention in Washington or European capitals is shaky at best. 3. The internal battleground. Gaza's armed gangs versus Hamas. This new ceasefire scenario is not just a matter of Israel and Hamas. Underneath, Gaza is fracturing internally. With Hamas's infrastructure battered, local armed gangs have filled the vacuum, looting aid convoys, controlling neighborhoods, and clashing with security elements. Some reports link these groups to Israel or extremist affiliates. Reuters +2. Hamas has responded with brutal force, arrests, summary executions, forced policing. They frame it as restoring order. Critics call it internal terror. Outside observers worry this could turn Gaza into a police state under warlord control. The ceasefire includes demands for Hamas to disarm or hand over military functions. But disarmament is existential for any militant group. Do you lay down your weapons and trust guarantees? In this sense, the plan sets up a paradox. If Hamas is too weak, it may lose legitimacy. If it pushes too hard, it alienates its own base. 4. Governance and the mirage of symmetry. Trump's 20-point Gaza plan proposes a transition, dismantle Hamas's military capability, establish a new governance framework with international involvement, and secure reconstruction. But the devil is in the details. First, disarmament. The plan demands objective destruction of weapons infrastructure, tunnels, munitions caches. In practice, this hands almost total security authority to Israel, because Hamas would have little leverage after surrendering its arms. Second, governance. The vision includes a so-called International Stabilization Force, ISF, composed of Arab and global partners to maintain order, train a police force, and supervise transitions. But so far, few states have committed troops, and legitimacy inside Gaza is uncertain. Wikipedia puts 1. Third, false symmetry. Much Western media and diplomacy tend to frame the conflict as two sides making mistakes. But Israel is the occupant, controlling airspace, borders, and military dominance. Treating both as equivalents erases the fundamental imbalance and lets the dominant party off the hook. For U.S. and European decision-makers, that narrative matters. Public support in the U.S. has declined. Many Europeans openly criticize Israel's tactics. If Western audiences see this as a moral bind, legitimacy of Israeli actions becomes contested, and political pressure for accountability increases. Reuters, +15, Europe and the US. Reputations, pressure, and policy dilemmas. Europe. Moral outcry, political pressure. Across Europe, public protests have roared. In major capitals, citizens demand halt to Israel's bombardments, improvements in humanitarian corridors, even cultural boycotts of Israeli participation in sports and arts events. AP News. Some European states have responded with diplomatic moves. An open letter signed by 209 former EU ambassadors demanded EU measures against Israel over violations in Gaza and the West Bank. The European Commission floated suspending Israel from parts of Horizon Europe, the bloc's flagship research funding scheme. CEP's The Guardian. Yet, real leverage is slim. Europe sells arms, trades with Israel, and remains a dependent ally in security matters. Its moral voice is powerful. Its muscle is limited. U.S. Strategic Balancing Act. In the U.S., Israel has been a near-universal bipartisanship issue historically. But that's shifting. Polls show growing skepticism. Support for Israel's military campaign is slipping, and more Americans believe Israeli actions in Gaza qualify as war crimes or worse. Wikipedia Trump's own messaging is complicated. He leans hard in support of Israeli security, but he also frames enforcement demands on Hamas, a way to maintain favorable optics at home without overextending U.S. commitment. Meanwhile, military planners and NGOs warn that the Gaza plan may fail without boots on the ground or enforceable guarantees. Bloomberg warned, Gaza peace plan will fail without U.S. troops. Bloomberg. 6. The West Bank, the overlooked front. The plan and the media frenzy focus overwhelmingly on Gaza, but you can't treat Gaza in isolation. The West Bank is the other half of the Palestinian reality. The Trump plan silences it. It doesn't mention it. On the ground, Israeli settlers, armed gangs, and state-supported mechanisms are pushing Palestinians off farms, attacking olive pickers, seizing land, and terrorizing communities. There is near-daily violence, often aided by state security forces or tacit consent. Amira Haas described how this is not ad hoc, but part of a systemic plan to expropriate land. Ignoring the West Bank is not just an oversight, it's a failure of imagination. A Gaza ceasefire that leaves the West Bank in turmoil is half a peace deal and likely unstable. For European and American audiences, this means supporting Gaza while ignoring the broader occupation does not neutralize risk, it perpetuates it. 7. What's next? Scenarios we should watch. Here are 4 possible trajectories in the coming weeks, months, and what they mean for U.S.-Europe policy. 1. Ceasefire collapses. If hostage bodies aren't returned, aid is blocked, or militant skirmishes resume, Israel might re-enter Gaza forcefully. Trump's enforcement threat becomes catalytic. Western governments will face pressure to condemn or intervene diplomatically. 2. Status quo détente. Gaza remains under a tight ceasefire. Hamas retains some security authority, internal suppression intensifies, rebuilding barely starts, and the region remains volatile but quiet. The cost is a de facto frozen zone, aid-dependent, semi-governed, with justice deferred. 3. International force intervention. If states commit troops to the ISF and back it with funding, we might see a mediated reordering of Gaza's governance. But success depends on legitimacy. Without the buy-in of Gazans, an occupying peacekeeping force risks being rejected. European capitals inclined to support multilateral missions will watch this closely. 4. Instrumentalization and fragmentation. Gaza becomes a testing ground for new global power plays. U.S. influence, Gulf states' sway, Israeli security control, Iranian proxies on the periphery, like Houthi involvement. The ceasefire becomes a veneer over deeper realignments. The shadow child. West Bank unrest, which could intensify as Gaza calms, creating pressure across Palestinian politics and in Western capitals demanding a comprehensive solution. 8. Why this moment matters to US and Europe. Reputational stakes. Israel is increasingly isolated in Western eyes. Reuters notes the ceasefire may offer Israel a path back from diplomatic isolation. A botched policy or perceived bias risks Europe being complicit. Reuters' moral legitimacy. Western publics are not indifferent. Blame or support carries political weight across elections, policy debates, NGO pressure, and media narratives. Security implications. Gaza can't be compartmentalized. Militants, alliances, border threats, and alliances, e.g. with Iran, carry over into Mediterranean geopolitics, refugee flows, and regional conflict. Precedent for peace enforcement. If this ceasefire succeeds, or fails, it sets a precedent for how the world handles asymmetric wars, ceasefires, and reconstruction in contested zones. Domestic pressure. European governments already face protests and calls for sanctions or diplomatic distancing from Israel. U.S. politicians in swing states may face pressure from diverse constituencies calling for restraint or accountability. 9. Closing thoughts. Here's what really matters. This ceasefire isn't just a pause, it's a crossroads. The question isn't whether peace returns in full, but whether legitimacy, justice, and structure are built or abandoned. Trump's threats and the 20-point plan push Gaza's future into uncertain hands. Hamas is caught between resistance and surrender. Israel is pressured to legitimize its tactics. Europe and the US must decide. Will they serve as enforcers, patrons, or honest brokers, or bystanders? In the months ahead, the fate of Gaza will be determined by concrete steps. Opening crossings fully, enforcing protection of civilians, creating credible governance, acknowledging the West Bank dimension, and ensuring accountability for human rights abuses. That's the story to watch. If this collapse, no amount of ceasefire prose will matter, and the world will ask again, did we learn this time?